Welcome back to the Jeff Randall Live special programme. What is a banker really worth? One aspect of the row over bumper city bonuses is fairness. It's a notion promoted by politicians from all sides. But when I spoke to the former deputy chairman of Barclays, Sir Nigel Rudd, for my documentary, he argued that the word should be abolished.
If I was the Prime Minister, I'd ban the use of fairness as a word, because I don't think you can be fair. I was involved with Barclays for many, many years. Bob Diamond and John Varney made a huge difference to Barclays as they went through this terrible period.
And in that sense, when they were both there, their pay was fair, in your view?
Well, actually, I think John Varney was underpaid, actually, but that's because I think what he did during that crisis was absolutely phenomenal.
Well, Sir Nigel's view hardly chimes with the findings of a Sky News poll, which found that most people want state-assisted banks, RBS and Lloyds, to stop awarding bonuses. In the YouGov survey, more than 3/4 of respondents said that bosses should not get a bonus if they worked for banks bailed out by the state. And more than half the 1,700 people questioned think that bankers are damaging Britain's business reputation. Well, joining me now at the Gherkin is Alpesh Patel, the Chief Executive of asset management company Prifinium, and John Purcell, the Managing Director of City Headhunters, Purcell and Company. Nice to see you both. Thank you for coming in. Alpesh, do bankers' bonuses offend your sense of fairness?
They do for this reason. Let me speak on behalf of two major social constituents, the unemployed. And the reason I say the unemployed, because when banks such as Barclays make £12 billion in profits, yet employ only 141,000 people, and laying off people, but hoarding those profits, not creating jobs. They're not creating jobs, they're actually reducing jobs. They're not helping broader society through that. That's not right. And the second thing is for pensioners, because it's pension funds which own the shares in banks like that, and the pensioners are not getting dividends. A lot of the banks pay far less than their peers. They pay about £2 for every £100 of shares you own in dividends. So those pensioners are suffering. And on top of all of that, they're destroying wealth because they can't even elevate their own share price. So they're stuffing the pensioners, the old and the infirm, they're stuffing the young people by not creating jobs for them, but just hoarding that money to pay themselves.
John, you're in the hiring business. Why do bankers command such high salaries? Because it's not as though there's a shortage of them.
Well, right now there isn't a shortage of bodies, but what there is always a shortage of is this fabled thing called top talent. Because, as Sir Nigel Rudd said, and I wouldn't agree with everything he said, but people like John Varley in particular can make a huge difference. And if we look at Stephen Hester at the Royal Bank of Scotland, who really is a hero for our times in the sense that he has taken on a job which is massively difficult, which just gets himself used as a political football and a lightning rod for all the anger, when he could have a job earning 3 or 4 times as much and be completely out of the public eye.
So, could he really do that?
Oh, easy. I mean, there's half a dozen institutions ring me up tomorrow if I said, hey, guess what, I got Stephen Hester looking for a job. That's not the problem. The issue is, I suppose, reward for failure or even reward for mediocrity. That's not going to sit well with anyone. And some of the figures bandied around about the disparity between average worker pay and chief executive pay are quite well founded. But if you look at, for example, and I don't want to go too heavily into figures, but Reckitt Benckiser and Bart Becht, who earned £91 million in his last year as chief executive, you didn't hear a peep out of shareholders or anybody else because everybody felt he'd earned it. So it wasn't a problem how much he'd earned, it was because he'd earned it and delivered.
Alpesh, do you believe that bankers at the top end possess special talent that sets them apart from the rest of us and therefore merits their pay?
Let me tell you how I'd measure it, but before I do, just to answer that last point about why we didn't hear a peep from Reckitt Benckiser is because they didn't wipe off about $10 trillion worth of market capitalisation from around the world. And the reason that matters is because those shares are owned by pensioners. That's why that wealth destruction matters. How would I measure how much a top-tier banker is worth? I'd look at their share price performance, because surely that's the purpose of a banker or any corporate executive, is to show some return on the value of the shares. With Reckitt, their share price has been going up in an upward trend. with the banks, the big banks, over the last 10 years? Not an iota. And these are people who are trying to make the share price go up. And the reason it's not is because share prices are linked to the earnings, the profits of a company, and their profits are depleted because they keep paying themselves huge salaries, so the profits are too small for the poor shareholder, the pensioner, to actually see the share price rise.
What about that point, John, that the credit crunch changed our banking system forever, but did it really change much about the pay structure?
Well, two things have happened, and one very notable that was reported just this week was the fact that Lloyds are clawing back some of the bonuses that were paid. Now,
well, that's right, isn't it?
Oh,
because,
absolutely.
If you think about what Lloyds did, it missold all those insurance policies.
Yeah. Now, it was, okay, maybe interesting news in the financial markets. It's actually a kind of a watershed moment for the UK in the sense that we are now prepared to go and take money back if it was inappropriately awarded, and that's a big deal. It's a sea change, and we hope we see more of that. With regards to Lloyds and Barclays, they're in a very difficult position because, of course, the politicians are all over it, because it's dead easy, as any politician you've had on this show or appears on every other show, the easiest thing for them to do is to get a few cheap points is to go and kick a banker. Whereas they're trying to compete with a myriad of global institutions, most of whom will not be familiar to the great British public. But the reality is you're trying to run a commercial organisation which is being held back by politicians, and that's very difficult.
Alpesh, you were shaking your head wildly there.
Because I'll tell you, there's three ways. It's not just about kicking bankers. There's three ways in which I and the British public would fall in love with bankers. First of all, set the pay based on a proportion of the corporation tax that they pay, not on the basis of the profits they generate. Last year, Barclays globally paid £6 billion in corporation tax. If the pay was set as a proportion of that, we'd say, great, you've done some social good, you can have your pay set as a proportion of that. Also, secondly, do it in terms of the number of people you're employing. Instead of sacking people and hoarding £12 billion worth of profit, why don't you employ some young people, train them, not necessarily train them to be bankers, but something useful. And the third thing, as well as those two, pay more dividends. Instead of £2 for every £100, why don't you pay those pensioners who've held your stock through good times and bad a little bit more of the profits, which you, again, have been hoarding within your own bank? Then you'll have respect of young people, you'll have respect of the public as a whole, you'll have respect of pensioners, because you're actually structured in the way you should be to do something within a society and not just for yourselves.
What do you think, John? Doesn't history tell us that at the moment the bankers are in the spotlight and they're changing their behaviour? But when we move on and we have another crisis in a different industry, they'll go back to square one and they'll go back to very big bonuses and very high pay, and they hope that no one will notice.
Well, I think, I suppose it's easy to say this time it's different, but this has been so profound. Now, it is absolutely clear that things got well out of hand in the decade from 97 to 07. There was this war for talent, and the idea of a bonus as a reward for doing something exceptional became the average. Then every salary survey said, okay, well, I want to be pegged against the top quartile. And it just literally, it spiraled completely out of control. There's no denying that. The correction we've had now is so profound, and the idea of clawback, as I mentioned earlier, is a revolution. And all of this will hopefully, and I strongly believe it will, change behaviour, and that's only going to be a good thing.
All right, John Purcell and Alpesh Patel, nice to see you. Many thanks for coming in. I doubt that we've heard the last of this row. Nice to see you.